Hello, and welcome. This is Waves of YA, Ocean County Library's brand new podcast focused on young adult literacy, brought to you by our teen literacy team. My name's Lindsay, and I'll be your host for today. I'm a teen librarian at the Brick branch, and joining me today we have...
Hi, I'm Allison. I'm one of the teen services librarians at the Toms River branch.
I'm Cecilia. I'm also from the Toms River branch in teen services.
And I'm Colleen. I'm the teen services librarian down here in Lacey.
Excellent. How's everyone doing today?
Good.
Super.
Ready to talk about some books.
Yeah, exciting. On today's episode is how it started versus how it's going. We'll be focusing on our personal favorite young adult titles, the classics from when we were teens, and new titles that just hit the top of our forever favorite lists. So, are you ready to get started, ladies?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay. So, let's go to Allison. Allison, can you tell me, how did it start for you? What kind of books were you reading when you were a teen?
Fantasy. I pretty much read, I feel like, every single fantasy book that I could get my hands on. And then occasionally I would read something like historical fiction, mostly because I ran out of fantasy books.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite fantasies that you read when you were younger?
I loved everything by Tamora Pierce. I really also enjoyed the Enchanted Forest Chronicles by Patricia C. Reed, which we actually own on Hoopla, and I just reread the whole series.
Oh,
so
that's fun.
They're hilarious. Pretty much anything that had like a strong female character. So, who else had stuff that teens would actually remember who they were? Mercedes Lackey, I read a lot of her. She's more of adult stuff though. And I really enjoyed one series, which you can't even find anymore, which was called Cry of the Ice Mark, which was this crazy kingdom. And there was snow leopards, super fun, but
Wow. That sounds
not
cool.
to be found in 2021.
Isn't that fun? That's not cool. Why not? When was it published? Like, how old is it?
I would say probably like maybe mid-2000s. It was not super popular. Like when it came out, I probably was like the only person who would have.
If it wasn't vampires in mid-2000s,
I agree. I was definitely into the vampire thing. Well, at least Twilight anyway. Okay, so fantasy when you were a teen, but now what are you into?
So mostly fantasy. I read like random other things that pop up. Like I'll do mysteries sometimes. I'm reading All Your Twisted Secrets right now by Diana Urban. I love anything that Karen McManus publishes. She does One of Us is Lying. Yeah, like kind of anything that just, I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds interesting. I'll take that.
Yeah, I read One of Us is Lying, but I'm really bad at following through on series. So I only read the first one, and I never went back. I never read her other books either.
The second one is really good.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
I actually liked it better than One of Us is Lying.
Yeah, I think so.
And I like Two
Can Keep the Secret.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like that better than One of Us is Lying. So
Yeah, and then she has a new one, right? The Cousins.
Yeah.
Newer.
Yeah, and that was even better, I think. I think she's
Really?
progressively getting better,
I guess
which
I'll
is
have
always
to read
fun
more.
for authors.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about her next one because it's being sold as like Ferris Bueller's Day Off with murder.
Ooh,
That sounds great.
I'm definitely in for that.
It has death in the title. I don't remember what the
So
title
what, did somebody
is.
actually kill Ferris?
Ferris dies today.
I think all the kids are like framed for something, but they were like not in school. So
Wasn't that like the
Oh, okay.
One of Us is Lying?
Breakfast
Sort
Club, 80s movie
Okay.
and some genre.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
80s is key. 80s is key. I like that. So I'm going to go to Colleen with the same question. How did it
Ooh.
start for you?
So I read a lot of fantasy too. Well, actually, by a lot, I mean I just read Harry Potter when I was little, and then I tried to read adult books. Like I thought I was better than other people for some reason. Now I just read anything. Like I read a lot of Stephen King, and like my favorite book, well, it still is good. It was A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, but that is technically YA, even though I feel like it's also in fiction. But that's just such a good book. It's not like old. And then my favorite thing that I remember reading constantly, which is again no longer in this system, is this series called Fearless. It was the less popular version by Francine Pascal. She wrote like the Sweet Valley High books. If you guys read those, but this was so good. It was so much drama going on in this book, and this because the premise is this. So it's like science fiction. Premise is she has no fear, so she just does whatever, and she's not scared, and she fights these people, and like she goes to high school and falls in love, and there's like a lot of like creepy stuff going on. Like I feel like there was a society trying to find her and her father, but then there was also teenage drama. So it was just awesome.
Gotta love the drama.
Yeah. And I remember crying at the end of one book because the one guy died, but then he was back 2 books later. And I was like, well, what the hell? But yeah, now I just read mostly YA, and just I throw in an adult book here and there because I am 35, and I should be reading something more around our age group.
Who says? YA is for everybody.
Yeah, it's true. And I still do juvenile books as well.
Adult
Oh,
boring?
me too. I like middle grade.
Adult books are just so boring. They take forever to.
Rude. I like adult books. They're fun.
I like memoirs, like adult memoirs.
Oh my God, no, that's brutal.
To adult memoirs. I like that. That's fun.
But yeah, I read mostly fantasy, but like Allison said, anything that looks interesting. But I also really love horror and science fiction. And I do read realistic fiction just so I can put it on our book list every year. Like I got to know what's out there.
For sure, I got to keep up with the.
Yeah, and that's the one I have to like struggle with because sometimes it's really like heavy and upsetting. Whereas fantasy, if people are like being eaten by dragons, it's fine because it's not real at all.
It's all pretend.
Yeah.
So you like horror. So were you into the Fear Street series?
Yeah.
I did.
So I always
really liked that. Mm-hmm.
I talk about my horror evolution as like from Goosebumps to Fear Street to Stephen King. And like maybe that's why I'm a little weird, but those Fear Street books were great. And I especially loved the ones that took place in like the 1700s where like you found out why the town was cursed. And then you had the modern day ones where the people were getting murdered with ice skates or whatever.
They were pretty gory, right?
Yeah.
I remember reading those kind of young, like a young teen.
Yeah.
I loved it. But it's funny because I didn't grow up to like really care about horror. Like I'm just now getting into Stephen King. But I didn't read Goosebumps. I just read Fear Street. Probably too young.
Yeah, but you're not a serial killer that we know of, so I guess it's okay.
This is true. There's still time though. Okay, so you did a lot of fantasy, or when you were younger, did you say fantasy?
I mean, I'm trying to remember like what I think I started reading more YA when I like went to college.
Yeah.
So it was Harry Potter for me, and then like adult stuff, like science. Some of Stephen King is more fantasy than others, but I really got into fantasy when I hit like 18.
All right. So you were a teen.
Yeah, I guess I feel like if I was in college, I wasn't a teen, but I was.
Yeah, your transition from what are you after a teen?
New adult.
Still.
You're new adult, young adult, emerging adult.
Emerging adult, that's the key word there.
So are you still reading the same kind of books now as an adult?
Oh, yeah. I just finished this book called There Will Come a Darkness, which is like your typical ensemble fantasy. One person is like an exiled king and one's a ruthless killer and there's like magic and stuff. So it's awesome.
Cool.
There's so many good fantasy out there. It's like we should do a whole podcast on just fantasy. Yeah,
fantasy can go a long way. I feel like there's so many. It's not my genre, but so many. Okay, so Cecilia, I'm going to ask you the same question since both Allison and Colleen answered. How did it start for you?
Unlike the other two, I am completely different now. So I used to read a lot of like speculative fiction, I guess you would call it, which is like set in our world, but it has supernatural elements. So I read a lot of Holly Black. She writes like fairies and fae. My like favorite book was Tithe. It's the first in her Modern Fairy series. I think that's what it's called. And I read Twilight. Like those I read like
I love Twilight.
type books. Crying in Eclipse.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So I read a lot of like speculative fiction, and I read a lot of manga too when I was a teen. So I read Fruits Baskets, which is kind of like speculative fiction. It's about like the Chinese zodiac, and each member of the family represents a different animal. If they're hugged by the opposite sex, they turn into their animal. But like by the end of the series, it's like not even what it's about. It's about more of like the relationships and emotional development. Read a lot of other manga series that were kind of also speculative fiction, or Full Metal Alchemist was kind of like steampunky. So that's more of like, that's a shonen, so that's like more like action adventure kind of thing. So
Manga is not something I ever really got into.
that was like anime club, manga, watch, vampires, anything with vampires really. I think like when I was in high school, that's when the like vampire craze was really like,
it got really big.
Yeah, because I was in my 20s by then. I remember I was in a college class reading I don't know, one of the Twilights. Maybe the second one, like with my phone, because it was dark. I was on a lecture, so it was dark. I had to know what happened. It was probably New Moon. Yeah, I think it was the second one.
I definitely, I read Twilight when I was in my 20s too. So not a teen thing, but I still like it, and I like the movies, and I don't care.
I love the movies.
yeah.
I don't know if it's a nostalgia thing now, but
yeah, a little bit probably a mix
for them. Like the teens are like, what are these? I don't know.
Versus when it's just like a random thing you remember reading when you were like 13. Like nobody else remembers you reading this thing when you were 13.
I don't remember a lot of what I read when I was 13.
Yeah, I needed Goodreads when I was 13.
I wish.
Oh,
I wish I thought to write down the books that I read. I think that would have been really cool to look back on, because I had no idea.
When I like first started here, I was like going through the shelves, and I just remembered by the book cover, I was like, oh, I read that. Like, or no, wait, I stopped and I didn't finish this. Should I pick it up? And then I never.
Yeah. Okay, Tuchilia, sorry, I skipped back.
It's
went
okay.
back. So you started with a lot of speculative fiction. Where did you end up?
So right now I read like mostly realistic and romance, which like there were romance elements in everything I read in like speculative fiction wise, but now it's just like the books mainly about the romance or realistic fiction, or a lot of diversity books, LGBTQ. That's pretty much what I read now.
Yeah.
The last one I read was a new one. I just got an arc of it. May the Best Man Win by Z.R. Eller. And it is about the main character is a trans boy, and it's told from two perspectives, from his perspective and his ex's perspective, and they're both going for prom king that year.
Interesting.
It's very like lovers to haters to maybe lovers again.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard of a book where they start as lovers, then enemies, then.
Yeah, it started at the end of their relationship.
Yeah.
So, and then,
that sounds cool. I'd read that. I feel like I read more books like you do.
Oh my gosh, the audiobook was amazing, because the narrator, I don't really like when there's dual perspectives and it's the same person reading. I'm like, I don't like, but he completely changed his voice for each person.
Oh, that's good.
So like I was like, actually, is this the same person? I'm not entirely sure. So
I love a good dual narration.
Yeah,
it makes all the difference.
It almost sounds like a play too. Like one of us was lying, had everybody was a different voice.
And I wonder how much more production that costs to have multiple voices than just one.
I don't know. Like Colleen and I were just talking about the initial insult. Did you do audio for that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
but that was the same person, right, doing both parts. But It felt so different, right?
No, it was two
Or was it
different.
two different
It was
people?
two actors. Yeah,
Okay.
because I like the one person who read for Felicity, and I have a weird thing. I have like a pipe dream of being an audiobook narrator.
I think
when
you
I
can do
grow
it
up.
very well, Lindsay.
When I grow up, it's what I want to do. So I end up listening to a lot of books. Once I hear someone I like, I'll go and listen to other books that they've
I
read.
do that.
I love when you like
exactly.
recognize someone's voice. They're like, "Oh, you played this in this book."
Yeah. So, and I really loved the cat voice.
Yeah,
What a creep.
it was so good. Oh my god. That's why I was trying to say, is this fantasy? Because it has a point of view of like a leopard or whatever.
Yeah, it's strange.
It's a great book.
Audio is cool. Okay, so so Cecilia brought up diversity, which I think is really something different that we see a lot now in YA books than we did when we were all teens. So, Allison, what kind of diversity are you seeing now in your fantasy books that you didn't see when you were younger?
Well, I think the first thing is like reading fantasy in like the mid 2000s. If the book was longer than 200 pages, they really wouldn't publish it until you got, like, I think the first long fantasy book I ever read was Twilight. So when things are that short, like, you got a lot of like fantasy, like fairy tale retellings because there was less world setup that they had to do.
Yeah.
That they knew they had so little pages that they got from the publishers. Like, I feel like a lot of times they took like easy outs, which now the YA fantasy, like, they don't. Like, they create these epic worlds. They make things complicated. There's multiple characters. They don't, like, they'll deal with multiple hard topics versus a lot of times you would only have maybe like the focus of the book would be, oh, like, it's an evil empire who's conquered this country. Now the native people are trying to get their country back, and they wouldn't address anything else.
Right.
So I think you're seeing a lot more different elements that they're incorporating rather than there being like very formulaic, like we're doing one thing, or it's just being something like a retelling something you've already heard or seen before.
Right. I know from the few fantasies that I have read that are newer, I feel like a lot of them have a lot of their character driven as well as like plot driven. So that's why they're so long, because you're getting to know all these characters, which helps add all that diversity now.
Yeah.
And before, there wasn't a lot of room for that. Cecilia, for your romance diversity, what do you see now that you didn't see? What, 2000s, you too? Early 2000s?
Yeah.
It wasn't that long ago. It's weird.
Yeah, it sounds like it's not that long ago, but it's like 15 years ago, 20 years ago.
It's crazy. Okay,
there are
yeah.
People
So
that can drink now.
What kind of change do you see? Are we having a glow up in YA?
Yeah, I think especially a lot of own voices books too. People that are write about characters of one diversity that are of that same diversity, whether it's a sexual orientation or if they are Southeast Asian and are writing books featuring Southeast Asian characters. A lot of when you mention that question, I'm like, their love interest is also of that same diversity, or is like not a white boy or girl, or so like a lot
no longer just a boy and a girl.
Yeah, no longer a boy and a girl.
Which is really great.
2 boys, 2 girls, non-binary characters.
And they're not just sideline characters, actual main characters.
Right. Yeah, they're
like
the focus.
Sundaya Menon's books all feature Southeast Asian main characters and love interests. And there's a lot like nowadays where it's mainly focused in one particular culture too.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot, which is really cool.
There's like a weird trend lately where it's like all food-based love stories.
Yeah, what's up with that?
Food is universal. Everyone loves food. So
I know everyone loves food, and like I just keep putting them on my list, and then like it just gets longer and longer.
Food
like
is huge.
one recently, A Taste of Love, which was sold. I was at, I think, a Penguin Teen panel, and it was sold as Pride and Prejudice meets The Great British Bake Off, and I was like, that sounds amazing. And then I couldn't remember the title, so I like emailed the publisher and was like, oh, it's that one that you talked about. It sounded really good.
Oh my, yeah. Well, I would definitely. I don't think I've read any food titles. I don't think so. But I mean, you can't go wrong with food. Food is great. Allison, do you agree? Food is great.
I think everybody agrees food is great. And when there's food on a cover, you're like, oh yeah, this sounds
Yeah,
interesting.
definitely.
Yeah, there's
I'll
that
eat-
pizza one right now
Yeah.
that I saw.
Yeah.
Yes. It's kind of a cheesy love story.
Yeah, is that any good? Did you read that one?
No, I just look at it and I'm like,
And then you want pizza?
cheese on the cover. That is on my list, though, my long food list.
There's
I love
another
food.
one that's a little older, Love and Gelato, and every time like it comes out, I'm like,
Oh,
oh yeah, I would take that. I love gelato.
I love gelato, so I'd read it.
Her
just-
stories are all based in other countries, too. She has Love and Gelato. There's the Olives one that's set in Greece.
ooh.
And then the other one is, I don't know, it's set in Ireland. Jenna
Ooh.
Welch.
Ooh, I'll skip the olives because no thanks. But
I don't like olives either.
Yeah, I don't like olives, but I do like grease, so I'd read
But I
about
think
that.
she
I
just
do like
uses the food. I don't think that's like the main part of the story. I think it's just like gelato, Italy.
For gimmick.
I'm
Olives.
interested in the Ireland one. I feel like every year I try to do a St. Patty's display, and there's not enough Irish fiction in our
100%
collection.
No, it's really a handful. There's not much.
So I'm gonna look into that one.
Bogchild is really good.
What is it?
Bogchild
Long Child.
by
There's-
Siobhan Dowd. We might have it. We might not have it anymore.
recognize
That
her
was a
name.
while.
I feel like she has something else.
Yeah, she has a couple books. She
Yeah.
passed away
Oh,
a few years ago, so she only has a small amount of books, but
Oh,
they're really
okay.
emotional.
ooh.
There's a really good one downstairs in J called The List, and I cannot remember the author's life for me, but she wrote it as like an ode to the Irish language because it really like it's so easy for it to disappear because everybody in Ireland speaks English.
Mm.
And it was phenomenal. Like it's kind of dystopian. It really doesn't take place in Ireland, but she's Irish. And when you like hear the backstory, I heard her talk about it at a panel. I like read the entire thing in like 2 days. It was so good.
Ooh.
And there's a really good horror series of 2 books called The Call.
Oh, I was
Yeah.
gonna ask about
Oh,
that
that-
because I
So
look at it all the time.
Really good.
Good.
But
Okay.
like you gotta, it's like some parts are extremely like
I
detailed.
know I can't pronounce the author's name.
Yep, Peter O'Geed is something or other. Yeah,
Yeah.
Peter. But Peter spelled like the Irish way.
Yes.
That's when I would have to look up how to pronounce his name and then write it down for myself.
That's another reason why I like audiobooks, because all the names I would not pronounce that correctly. The person, they literally get the pronunciation from the author, so it's correct.
But
But
then
then I can't spell it though. That's what
yes. Then it gets
I've only
confusing
heard it.
when you see it written down. You're like, who is this? What's going on?
Like, huh? What are you talking about? Oh God.
All right. So, Colleen, diversity for you. What about horror? Any change in that?
I feel like there's still a lot of like female main character, like white, straight females in horror in the YA genre.
And they die.
There's a new one coming out from Tiffany D. Jackson, White Smoke. It sounds like really good.
Yeah.
It sounds like, because I was listening to her talk about what she used to read, and it was all like horror stuff. I'm like, why are you writing like
Yeah.
her kind of have horrifying elements in them, but
But
she
it's not truly the horror genre.
yeah, it's a YA psychological thriller, a classic
okay.
haunted house story from set in New York.
I really like Tiffany D. Jackson as long as she doesn't borrow anything that she's already used in her previous books.
Does she do that sometimes? Have you seen that?
She does a lot of
noticed-
twist endings.
Yeah,
I feel like.
and I felt I haven't read all of her books, but the ones that I did, I felt like the twists were like so kind of close to each other. Like
Well,
not
we'll
the
see
same,
how this one goes.
but yeah. So I definitely am gonna read
But
it.
that's good because I really think that there's a lack of diversity in horror. I really like. Now I'm looking at my Goodreads, and I think that I'm accurate by saying that. Fantasy has become very diverse. You know, we see standalone books of all different cultures.
Yeah, I feel like realistic
races,
fantasy, they definitely are diverse.
And
like I don't even have to try to like make a diverse display. It's not hard.
Right.
Even some like authors, like fantasy authors, like Kristen Cashore, she just released Winterkeep, which is like the 4th book in the Graceling series, and it like there's been a large gap since the 3rd one came out, and like I noticed like it's the same author writing in the same world, and like LGBTQ characters, like a lot more diversity in people's descriptions, like clearly something has changed that she as an author included these elements. Like it's not like it was a different person writing the book series.
Yeah, because Bitter Blue still felt like Bitter Blue, just grown up. Like, but it just felt better as a world. It felt like more like a world, not just a little teeny little 5,000 person town which sometimes which sometimes it could feel like you used to read these books and you're like, I'm just picturing a bunch of white people that look like me. But now it's like you can picture a whole different world with different people. Yeah. It's great.
I think like back in the day, nobody really like pushed that there was like diversity. Like it was like a side character that was mentioned, but like one time it was mentioned that they might have like darker skin or lighter skin or whatever, but it wasn't like, you know, there wasn't a cover where there's a character of a different ethnicity on there other than white. And now it's like there's covers where
and then you run into
people that are not white.
I feel like you run into the problem too now with authors writing voices for different groups, which is tough.
Well, they have what they call sensitivity readers now, so they will give the book to someone of that orientation or ethnicity, and they'll be like, actually, no, this way, like a Black girl would never say this, a Black girl would never do this.
That's so smart, though. I think that's a great idea because I know it gets difficult. I recently read a book, and it was not well, it could be YA. It was about a 14-year-old kid who was really just discovering that he was trans. And I didn't realize what the book was about until I read it. And, you know, it's written by this cis white male and there's a lot of flack going around about, you know, he shouldn't have written the book, but he did. But apparently it's well received. He's in Australia. It's not out here in the States, but apparently they don't mind. So it's so interesting to see the difference.
I always find it so interesting when people give like flack for an author for writing a story, and it's like you don't know who's in their life that maybe they're writing the story for. So
it could be a many thing.
Exactly. That as long as like it's a good story and it feels authentic and people receive it well, then it really shouldn't always matter who the author is. Yeah. But I also get it too that there should be a diversity of authors.
Right. And it shouldn't be like, oh, I'm just going to throw in these characters just because. So it is.
Yeah. And I think
that happens a lot.
Yeah. And we're seeing that with like disabled characters, I think. Yes. There's a lot of unauthentic stories out there.
And that are just doing it to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's tough.
It'll probably get better as stuff in YA usually does.
Yeah.
What I really appreciate nowadays is the whole process is done by that person's ethnicity. So the book that I just mentioned, May the Best Man Win, was written by a trans author, trans narrator. I think the person who did the book cover was also trans. Possibly the editor was also trans. So
that's awesome.
Like the entire process is done, and like it's because there is like marginalization in the industry too, which shouldn't be,
Right.
but it happens. So like that's a place for everyone to kind of like converge and work on a project together.
And that's the great thing about YA. I feel like YA is like ahead of every genre, or not genre.
I feel like
what do we call this? Young adult is it a genre?
It has its own separate section at the bookstores.
Yeah.
Its own separate section in like the library. I think
I feel like they're like the YA authors and publishers are really good at.
I think a lot of it too is that unlike like children's who like has like children's mysteries and children's fantasy, and adults do the same thing, like YA, we just put all of YA together.
Mm-hmm.
So you can have like a fantasy book with LGBTQ characters who are falling in love, and it's not a question of like, well, where do we put it? Is it a romance? Is it fantasy? It's just going YA. Like, it doesn't matter.
That is true. I like that.
What I've seen recently is the adult publishing world kind of fall into YA with their fantasy titles, kind of going with the mythology of different cultures and whatnot. Like a lot of African culture mythology has been, at the forefront of YA, like recently with Children of Blood and Bone. And I think right now, like other in adult fantasy, I've seen a lot of like, own voice authors in fantasy.
Cool.
Yeah, we're the cutting edge, and then the others.
Yeah.
Everybody should copy off of YA.
YA is the best.
But it's true. I mean, look at the growth that we're seeing just from the books that we've read, 15, 20 years ago, which it feels like forever ago, but really isn't that long ago. So it's interesting to see the development. We're old guys.
Yeah.
Young at heart.
Okay, so before we finish, I'm going to ask you each to name one book, a newer book, that you want to recommend to everyone and anyone. All right, Allison, go.
I'm gonna do American Royals by Catherine McGee. So it's not a fantasy, but it is if at the end of the American Revolution, when America defeats England and somebody turns to George Washington and says, "Are you going to be the next king of America?" He actually says yes. So it takes place in like modern America, but the entirety of American history happened while it was a constitutional monarchy. And the main characters are the Washington. So there's 4 main characters, 2 which are the Washington princesses. So they're the next in line to the American throne. And it's super cute. Like, I love royal things, and it was like American history, and it was adorable. So
excellent. I see it going out a lot.
It's really like our copy usually is not in it, and the audio is excellent too. So
all right, cool.
Thank you. I read that one.
Yeah, do you agree? It's good.
Yeah, it was okay.
Don't hold back, Colleen. We're trying to sell it.
I would, if somebody had an interest, I would say, yeah, that was a good, decent read.
Okay, fair. So what's a book that you highly recommend right now?
So one that I haven't mentioned yet today. So I just read Everything Sad is Untrue by Daniel Nayeri, because I put it on my middle school summer reading list, and I was like, oh, this looks interesting. I want to read it. It's extremely difficult to explain what it's about. So basically this he's an Iranian immigrant living in Oklahoma, and like he's supposed to be doing a presentation at the front of his classroom, and he just like starts spewing out these random stories from his past and from like Persian mythology. It's like, and the author says it's like 1001 Nights, but in the middle school classroom, because he's like blending his mythology with Persian mythology. It's just wonderful. Absolutely great book.
I did start that one, but I didn't finish it.
But it bounces around. It
won an award, right?
Yes, something. It won a something award.
Something award.
It's an award-winning book.
It's an award winner.
Really, really, really loved it. I liked I was trying to find. I wanted to have like on my middle school list half male protagonists, half female protagonists, because I think we see too many females. Not that I mean it's necessarily bad, but then this one just gripped me because
Yeah,
it was
I
like
started it
truly
and I
middle
really
school.
liked it, but I got lost, and then I was like, well, I'll try it again later.
But I have been reading a lot of books like about, with Persian characters, so that I'm recognizing some of these like cultural things they
Look
do.
at you learning.
So I was like, oh hey, I know I forget what the term is for it, but it's like all about politeness. Like you come into somebody's house and they offer you food and you say no, and they're like yes, and then you say no. It goes back and forth forever until finally you're like, okay, let me have some food. But it's like it's a huge part of their culture, and it's just so interesting to
That's
see it like
fun.
over different books by different authors.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that. All right, Cecilia, your book.
I'm gonna go off the cultural thing. I really liked. I guess it's older. It was new when I was thinking about it, and then I was like, actually, that's 2 years old. But whatever.
Well, that's kind of new.
Love Boat Taipei by Abigail Hing Wen. It is about Ever, who is 18 years old. She's like, this is her last summer before she goes to college. And her parents really want her to do one thing, and she is really into dancing. And she had like her whole summer planned out, and then her parents are like, actually, you're going to go to Taiwan to study Mandarin for the summer. And she's really super against it. So she thinks she's going to this very like stuck up summer camp in Taiwan for overachieving kids. And it turns out that's not really what it is. It's like that on the surface, but like everybody parties and drinks and like does crazy stuff at night. And it's about her just like rediscovering her culture, and she kind of goes deeper into her love of dance by going to a dance academy that's in Taiwan, and her finding, love. There's like a love triangle, there's fake dating, there's like 100 different like YA tropes in there.
That sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
And it does get a little like sexy at times.
Oh, spicy.
And the audiobook was like really good.
Like spicy?
Yeah, I might have to read this one.
Steamy YA? Ooh. That's one thing I do notice is the YA has gone very steamy.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Very steamy.
It was like crazy when like two teens had like a heavy makeout session when you were reading YA, and like now that's like nothing. It's just like
some vivid stuff sometimes.
Yeah, but that's for another episode. We'll talk about this YA steam. 16 plus only. All right, so I think that's all we have time for. Ladies, thanks so much for sharing all your wonderful books and letting us all know how you have grown with your YA reading. So everyone, thanks for joining us today. Be sure to check out the Ocean County Library's website for more podcasts and events on our website's calendar of events page. All the titles you heard mentioned today can be found through the Ocean County Library, free with your library card. If you would like to email the team for readers' advisory questions or questions to be featured on one of our episodes or topics you would like to see us cover, please email wavesofya@gmail.com. That's WAVESYA@gmail.com. And until next time, happy reading.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Lim, the author of Spin the Dawn and Six Crimson Cranes, and I'm so excited for my upcoming event with Ocean County Library on July 22nd. I grew up going to my local library in Northern California and discovered so many of my favorite books through simply browsing the shelves and talking to the librarians. And I remember a school trip to the library to listen to authors and illustrators speak about their books. I never thought that one day I would be one of those authors. It's been a thrill and a joy, and I'm really looking forward to meeting readers new and old. I'll be talking about my new book, Six Crimson Cranes, which releases on July 6th and is inspired by the fairy tale The Wild Swans. It's about a princess whose 6 brothers are cursed into cranes, and she has to break their spell with the help of a shape-shifting dragon, a flying paper bird, and the young lord she was supposed to marry.